You know, Christmas is a time of storytelling. Even people who normally dislike telling or listening to stories at all will sit down with their arms clasped around their knees and either tell or listen to a story of a Christmas miracle. Sometimes the stories are shared by reading from a book, sometimes by speaking from a memory, or sometimes by watching. How many of us have made sure that we see at least one of a variety of movies during the Christmas season? The titles are well known. White Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life, A Christmas Carol, Miracle on 34th Street, and so many others. The stories and the images shared at Christmas evoke special feelings and memories for many. Stories, in fact, are essential to our existence. They provide a centering, a place of refuge, a way to identify who we are and whose we are. Without the stories that rehearse where we have been, there are often no stories of where we are going. In other words, when we can't celebrate the stories of our past, we often feel lost in the present and lose hope for the future. Allow me to share a transformational moment with you. Allow me to share a story. One Christmas, many years ago, when our sons were much smaller and an empty nest was still only something Sue and I experienced in a freshly cut tree, I was sitting in front of the fireplace in our tiny home that had been built by my father and some family friends on a hill overlooking the family farm. As the falling snow outside gathered momentum, I began reflecting upon the season and all the meaning that it held for myself and my family. Gazing at the tree, which we had so carefully picked out of the family forest as our personal best for the year, I became swept up in a blizzard of emotions and memories. Before me, hanging somewhat precariously upon the branches of the aromatic pine, were the ornaments that formed a chronological timeline of our then relatively brief existence together as a family. Some of the adornments were purchased by others and given as love offerings. Some were precious, handmade gifts that expressed an emotional involvement by others in our lives. And some we had made ourselves during moments of television-free creativity. Each piece of glitter, each stitch, each drop of glue creating a story, speaking of moments ripe with expectations, hopes, and yes, even a few heartaches. Teetering on the branches was a plethora of ornaments. There were those that Sue and I had stitched together during our first years of marriage, pre-child days while still in college. We'd stuff them to give them the look of tiny pillows, formed in the shape of Santa and snow people. There were small ornaments with pictures of the kids inside, each year a new creation from school showing us the same yet different child, transforming before our eyes. The angel on top, given to us by a dear friend many seasons prior, now looked ragged and stained, the survivor of a flooded basement. Each delight, each memory nestled in the needles could be traced to a specific time in our journey as a family. Around the room, there were other symbols of times past, like the stockings that had needlepoint bears on them, bears that I had labored over for what seemed the better part of a year. I had tried to make delicate maneuvers with the needle, yet having only clumsy vice grip hands with which to accomplish the surgery, I soon gave up on any pretext of daintiness. It was a few years later that we added names to those stockings. This time it was Sue's expertise that stitched on the unique names, Mom and Dad, a direct response to our first child. It was to be Jesse's first Christmas. From there, my eyes and my mind both fixated on the creche that had been placed under the tree. You know the nativity scene I'm talking about. Hands sculpted by a famous Italian in the time-honored tradition called plastic injection molding. The figures had been lovingly arranged under the tree by our youngest son, Keegan, and soon disarranged by our cats, causing general chaos to that pastoral scene. Angels hanging upside down, a wise man resting his head on a lamb, a cow trying to climb a ladder to the loft, and Mary looking askance at the empty, overturned manger. The manger was empty, not because we have a tradition of placing the baby Jesus there with great ritual on Christmas Eve, but empty because some years before, one of our cats needed it for their own nativity scene, the location of which is still unknown. Amongst the flood of visual images, it was our nativity scene that really grabbed my attention. It seemed to be a reflection of my past that was perhaps more revealing than even the different memories triggered by the various ornaments. It seemed symbolic of those times in my life when chaos ran amok and I hadn't a clue on how to keep from collapsing in frustration. Symbolic because those times of chaos were and continue to be the times when I seem to have misplaced Jesus and stand rather forlornly looking at the empty spot in my life. Symbolic because those are the times when God seems furthest away, almost unapproachable. My guess is when the shepherds were out with their flock, wondering at the immensity of creation, they too felt that God was a bit unapproachable. One can feel rather insignificant gazing up at the stars, particularly if you're alone. One can also feel rather distant from God, separated by what can seem an insurmountable chaos of stars, if all that has been experienced of God is a judgmental manipulator of the cosmos, sitting high above the stratosphere, out of reach and out of touch. The story Luke was relating speaks of a time when the chaos in the lives of the people who lived prior to the birth of Jesus had become overwhelming, and the separation between God and God's children had become unbearable. The night sky for those shepherds possibly seemed larger and more of a barrier to God than ever before. The world seemed like it was about to be swallowed up by the chaos, but of course it wasn't a new feeling. The Bible is filled with story after story of people giving into the chaos and becoming separated from a healthy relationship with God. It's also full of stories that very clearly say many people remained in that state of separation. For them, God just seemed too far away from their reality to be believable. Now, if that's all the story was about, then it would indeed be a hopeless situation. But we know there's much more. The Bible is also filled with story after story of God reaching out, trying to bridge that sometimes immense chasm, reaching out to bring significance to those who have felt lost. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. It was as if God was saying, enough. All of the prophets and the angels and the interventions in your lives still haven't conveyed with full force the message of my love for you. The gap remains between us, so I will bridge that gap in a way that is as real as possible. I will experience the joys and the pains that you experience. I will know life as you know it, and ultimately will know death as intimately as you know it. I will take you by the hand, God was saying, and show you the way out of the chaos into my presence. The theological word for all that is incarnation, meaning in the flesh. Jesus was the incarnation of God, God in the flesh. The birth of the Christ child was God breaking through the barrier of expanded chaos to touch those shepherds and us in a way that would leave no more room for separation. Have you known times of chaos? Times when a relationship ended in the midst of pain? Times when you questioned your own worth or the worth of the job you're in? Has the chaos taken the form of, neglecting the family or feeling neglected yourself? Do you wonder if the chaos will ever end? Of course, we always try to make sure the nativity scene of our lives is picture perfect. But there are those moments when we seem to lose track of Jesus. Times when we feel more scared than sacred. There are those moments when the presence of God seems to be misplaced. The good news is that the Holy One continues to reach out to us in a myriad of ways to help us comprehend the significance of our lives. Whether we are alone or in the midst of the clamor of thousands, God is reaching out for us to draw us in, to love us. My wish for you this Christmas is simply this: that Jesus, the one we call the Savior, can be found in the midst of your life. My prayer is that the very real presence of God be yours. And this will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. Just a thought.